Hello and welcome. I'm Laura Briggs with the Vegan Fitness Runner podcast, where I'll be talking all things running, health and fitness, and what it means to be an active vegan. Rohini Bajekal is a plant-based nutritionist who draws on her own personal experience living with hormonal health issues to advise others on the best way to live a healthy lifestyle. In this episode, we talk about how much fuel is enough, what is REDS, and how women can improve their running through a better understanding of their own bodies. Hello, Rohini. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. So, good to chat to you as well after we just happened to meet in person at the I Could Never Go Vegan premiere this week. It felt very serendipitous. I'm very grateful to be invited onto the podcast and chat about all things nutrition.
Oh, you're so welcome. You know, it's lovely to have you on, and it's lovely to have somebody with so much knowledge about a vegan diet, because I often, obviously, as you know, talk to a lot of athletes, people who've maybe transitioned to veganism kind of maybe later on in their life. So we're still, myself included, still kind of finding their way a little bit. But this is your bag. This is where your knowledge bank lies. You've done a huge amount of research into nutrition, and I'm really excited to kind of learn a lot more from you actually on our chat today. You specialize in hormonal health, don't you, Rohini? And what exactly is it that you look into?
Yeah, so I'm passionate about all areas of nutrition, but particularly, for me, I definitely started out doing a huge amount, solely focusing on plant-based nutrition. And whilst that's my approach with all my clients, and I've personally been following a plant-based diet for almost 20 years, I realized that so many plant-based eaters are actually thriving, they're doing really well. There's an abundance of evidence-based nutrition information thanks to the likes of plant-based health professionals, UK and other organizations that are kind of putting out solid, concrete evidence. But actually, there's a huge part of the puzzle that's being missed, and that's around how nutrition can support hormonal health. And that's an area where I see both plant-based eaters, omnivores, all eaters sort of sometimes struggle, and especially women, because women do tend to be sometimes sidelined when it comes to these areas. So nutrition and lifestyle medicine is something I'm really passionate about. When I first started off working as a nutritionist, I was focusing solely on really the food approach. And I realized quite quickly that food, while it's probably one of the most important cornerstones of health, there are several other pillars of a healthy lifestyle that are often neglected. And I would see people where they're eating a healthy, nutritious, balanced diet on paper, but they're not getting the results and they're not feeling great. And then I would start realizing actually they're only sleeping about 5 hours a night, or they're in very sedentary desk jobs and they're not moving. So I always take a quite holistic view of things with my clients. And I have a diploma in lifestyle medicine as well, because it's really important to look at an individual and look at that 360 degrees picture. And this is true for absolutely everyone. And that's why those pillars, just to mention what they are, they're plant predominant diet, getting adequate movement or physical activity, restorative and restful sleep, reducing or avoiding alcohol, tobacco, other risky substances, nurturing positive relationships, and something that's really critical in the modern world is managing our stress.
That is really tricky, isn't it? Managing stress, especially, I'm going to say it, and I'll probably be absolutely lambasted for it, especially as a woman, because I think we have a lot on our shoulders generally. What are the particular considerations that women have to think about, maybe when they start to change their diets?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So it's really important to also just mention that women were excluded from most studies until the sort of 1980s onwards, and they were just often really, and even now, it's only just changing now, women were considered sort of small men. And there's a famous exercise physiologist, Dr. Stacey Sims, who sort of said, women are not small men. We have our own kind of needs, and that changes throughout the life cycle, from the time of puberty up to kind of the reproductive phase, and then perimenopause and menopause. And it's no one person is the same as the other. So it really depends. And then there are other major considerations as well, like pregnancy, breastfeeding, postpartum, if that applies to you. So it's really key that when it comes to nourishing ourselves, we're looking at what phase of life we're in and our individual needs. And that's so dependent on a variety of things, not just our gender, but also things like our body weight, our genetics, our ethnicity and medical conditions we have, our dietary pattern, our ability to access healthy, affordable, fruit and veg, and all of these things have to be taken into account. But definitely the thing I see that affects so many people, and not just women alone, but is the impact of diet culture. And that really can affect how we show up for ourselves and how we nourish ourselves daily. And whilst changing to incorporating more plant-based foods is a fantastic thing to do, there's certain nutrients of focus and there's certain things that we should be aware of, and also certain pitfalls, because a lot of the general kind of rhetoric is eat less, move more. And while we are struggling in the UK with a great deal of overweight and obesity, and there's that can have a huge burden, there is this idea that we should be restricting and cutting things out, whereas my approach is very much on what you can add in.
I really enjoy eating. So the thought for me of cutting anything out it's a no-go area. But I'm not necessarily in the majority there, am I? A lot of women, when they transition to plant-based diet, or they're thinking about their weight and their health, there's probably a tendency for them to eat less, isn't there, as a general rule? Because they're always, there's this culture of diet, like you said, and trying to be thinner. On a plant-based diet, that's not a great idea, is it? That people should be able to eat more or enough. How do you get that across to people?
I'm totally with you, Laura. And look, a plant-based diet is fantastic for weight management. It can have great number of benefits because it's rich in fiber, which promotes satiety. It's nutrient dense, but the foods tend to be lower in calories. But that's not always something that we want, and it's not something we should always be striving for. We should be really focusing on the quality of our diet and making sure we're meeting our nutrient needs. Underfueling can be an issue, particularly among runners, and I know that you have a lot of active individuals and runners listening to this podcast. But what we want to do, because plant-based diets tend to be less calorie dense, we want to be getting an abundance of fruit, vegetables, whole grains, beans, soya, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, and then also have some space for fun foods, whether it's a lovely vegan cupcake or, a meal out with friends. We need to be having some of that flexibility in our routine. I think it's really important for both psychological and physical health. So some of the things that people might do when they switch to a plant-based diet is actually end up eating less than they actually need, because they're swapping out these kind of energy-dense, calorie-dense foods like the sort of meat and dairy, and instead of replacing it with foods that are rich in protein, iron and zinc, like tofu and tempeh, they're just simply cutting that out, and they might be having a plate of vegetables or just some pasta with marinara sauce, whereas that's not really going to be enough. It's not going to be meeting your needs on a regular basis. So certainly eating enough in terms of quantity, but also getting an array of all the different food groups in there, and a healthy balance of carbohydrates, protein, fats, that's really, really important. But it's so easy for people to kind of go wrong and get scared of things. I've worked with so many women in my clinic who are scared of fats. They've been told they need to eat a really low-fat, whole food plant-based diet. And whilst a low-fat, whole food plant-based diet can be particularly helpful for some conditions, we know it can be particularly helpful in type 2 diabetes, for example. I'm pretty against a low-fat, whole food plant-based diet for most women, because we want to be getting, it's the type of fats that's really important. It's swapping out that saturated fat for those polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats that you can find in things like nuts and seeds and avocados and extra virgin olive oil. So it's getting those nourishing fats, and it's really important because fat actually helps absorb and metabolize certain things and helps with the absorption of vitamins A, D, E, and K. So adding some seeds or avocado to your salad will actually help you absorb more of that goodness. And I really try and shift people away from fearing food, but looking at how you can have a harmonious relationship with food that's nourishing yourself, the planet, and of course animals. And the food that's kindest for us is kindest for all three of these things. So it's a wonderful lifestyle, but it's just being conscious, because if you're feeling depleted and you're not getting enough, you're not going to really be able to sustain this lifestyle. And that's my job as a nutritionist. I want people to be able to thrive on this lifestyle. It's not something that's a diet or a fad, but something that we want to be able to sustain. So sometimes it's just adding in more of those foods that I mentioned, the tofu, tempeh, beans, lentils, nuts and seeds, that sometimes people shy away from because of misinformation.
It's a real learning curve, isn't it, Rohini? And I know that part of your job is kind of, like you said, educating people about what's okay to eat, and that actually there are a myriad of foods out there that provide, the proteins and the carbohydrates. A lot of people, and I'm sure you've heard this before, think that, vegans eat salads and therefore that involves, lettuce, cucumber, tomato, and perhaps just don't really understand how much food is out there that is accessible to us and is good for us. How do you start? Do you give people kind of a list of foods that are really good for them, or do you have any particular top foods that are really, good starting points for people looking to go down a plant-based diet?
Yeah, so I really try not to categorize food as good and bad food, because again, it feeds into the idea that there are, bad foods and things that we have to be really scared of, but it's really focusing on adding things in. So often it's making those plant-based swaps. As if you're currently having a lot of cow's dairy, swapping out for soya milk, which is still a great source of protein and other nutrients, or swapping an egg-based scramble for tofu scramble, which actually has a higher quantity of iron in it, which is such an important nutrient for women, because iron deficiency anemia is the number one nutritional deficiency globally, and it can have an array of issues. And quite often heavy menstrual bleeding can contribute to that. So for me, it's all about what you can add in and swapping things in and making that transition over time. Obviously, there will be some people who want to go vegan overnight. Maybe they've watched the documentary that we both watched on Wednesday. That other people, transitioning over time can really help, so that you educate yourself alongside that through podcasts like this, through books, through documentaries, through evidence-based information. And your gut microbiome can also get used to that increase in fiber as well. So one of the best things is just to fill your plate with colour. Get in a variety of different food groups, from fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, lentils, nuts and seeds, and try and just pay attention to how you feel. If you're fatigued and feeling depleted, then make sure that you are actually eating enough, that you're getting those protein-rich foods, and the foods that are rich in plant protein that I've mentioned. And also, of course, there are some key supplements. So everyone who's on a plant-based diet must take a good quality B12 supplement. A reliable source of B12 is a non-negotiable, and it can help prevent nerve damage and fatigue and other issues. And then also considering some other things like iodine, which is key for thyroid function, and vitamin D, because we live in the northern latitudes, so we're not getting much sun. And I know that all the runners on the podcast, you are probably getting out there and getting a bit more sun exposure, but it's still impossible really to get enough vitamin D between September and early April in the UK. So I certainly recommend that. And there are things like a algae-derived supplement as well, which can be particularly important if you are trying to conceive, you're pregnant, or you're breastfeeding, or you're feeding younger children or older adults. And you can also get alpha-linoleic acid, which is another form of omega-3, through the diet in the form of things like ground flax, chia, walnuts. But there's so many vegan starter guides, plant-based starter guides on the Plant-Based Health Professionals UK website. We've got a 21-day plant-based challenge, which gives you loads of tips. So there's a lot of free information out there for people who can't afford to see someone like me, or who don't want to. There's so many different options, but just start with meals that you enjoy and find plant-based alternatives for those.
Just harking back to earlier, Rohini, when you said that, women were considered basically little men. Yeah. Obviously, that's going to contribute to perhaps a certain way of eating, but women's bodies are complex things, aren't they? And there are going to be, times of the month when they're feeling tireder, and, they're in different ages and stages of the life cycle. There are going to be times when, we need either less or we need more. How does somebody kind of, how do they kind of, I suppose, diarize that and make sure that they're eating what they need to eat, at certain times of the month or the week or whatever it may be?
Such a great question, Laura. And I think there's growing awareness of understanding our menstrual cycle for those who are not pregnant or on hormonal contraception or in the menopause. And this is for anyone who menstruates. And, just being aware of that and your energy levels. Some people might actually have a lot of energy during their period, and other people, while they're bleeding, might need to take some more rest days. So it's all about understanding yourself, and you can use a period tracking app or a diary, but it's important to understand that and understanding the different phases. I recently wrote a blog about how to eat and support your menstrual cycle for Deliciously Ella. It's up on her website and free to access. Maybe you could link to it in the show notes. But that sort of talked about the different ways to support yourself. And you can do that through your training, through your nutrition. So, for example, certainly in the bit leading up to ovulation, or the follicular phase and ovulation, that tends to be a period where estrogen is higher and you're really able to kind of meet those personal bests and smash your targets. And that's when it's probably you could fit in a bit more training. And we actually know from studies that female athletes have a higher amount of ACL injuries in the second half of their cycle, the luteal phase, which is the period after ovulation leading up to menstruation. So it's really fascinating, because for those who are prone to injuries, it could be worth looking at that. There's currently still not kind of enough robust data to say people should be eating this, that, or the other at certain points in their menstrual cycle. Although you'll see a lot of wellness influencers talking about things like seed cycling and stuff like that, which I try to simplify things for people. I really believe that all of this noise can stop people nourishing themselves properly and reducing the fear and stress around food. It should be joyful, not stressful. And we don't need to overcomplicate it. You don't need to only eat flaxseed at this time of the month or whatever. It's about getting that array of food in and not just hyperfixating, if that makes sense. But certainly in the second half of the cycle and the bit leading up to menstruation, you tend to maybe have slightly lower energy levels, need a little bit more rest and recovery. Lower intensity workouts might be worth adding in or doing, so things like yoga and lots of gentle walks rather than doing lots of sprinting. But again, everyone is so different. So I always want to caveat that by saying that for the vast majority of people, they will naturally feel lower energy levels, more cravings for sugar and so on. So it's just about listening to your body and not trying to push yourself to the max, because high intensity training does need to be balanced with other forms of training ideally, and certainly active recovery or rest days.
So that brings us quite nicely then, Rohini, on to the flip side of the coin, when, female athletes or females that are doing, a lot of exercise maybe aren't getting enough rest, and they can actually push themselves way above what is recommended for their bodies, can't they? And that can lead to something called REDS, which I know that you're keen to talk about. So could you maybe explain a little bit about what that means?
Absolutely. So REDS stands for Relative Energy Deficiency Syndrome. And there is, an official consensus statement from the International Olympic Committee. It's been published in places like the British Journal of Sport Medicine. And this is something that most coaches, running coaches, rowing coaches know about. And before, it was called the female athlete triad. And I'm very happy they've changed the name, because REDS can affect people of all genders, including men. And it's certainly this been shown to be a prevalence among kind of lightweight sports, so lightweight rowers, lightweight boxers, dancers, male dancers. And certainly it was sort of first identified more in kind of ballerinas. And that it's really what happens is the there's a low energy availability. So energy intake is not matching up with the energy output or the demands. And that has a lot of different issues, both in the short term and the long term. And it can have a lot of adverse outcomes, particularly for bone health, even for performance, and ultimately professional athletes or even recreational athletes. A lot of them, they care most about performance. So that's often a good way to kind of encourage them to start addressing this. And it can happen for unintentional reasons. It can be due to underfueling. Sometimes, and we do notice there's a prevalence among vegetarian and vegan athletes, and that's often because those foods are less energy dense. So it's important to kind of be aware of that. There's an adaptive response, and things like bone turnover and stuff is reduced. So there's the hormonal production basically kind of shuts down. What happens, it's kind of like your eggs go into the freezer And menstruation can often cease in those who menstruate, and that results in a condition called functional hypothalamic amenorrhea. So, and that's because the body is going to prioritize kind of survival rather than reproduction. And so, and if your periods kind of start getting a bit wonky, or they go missing, and you are doing a lot of running, or you're doing a lot of exercise, or you're under fueling, that might be a sign of REDS. And that's usually quite a late stage of REDS. It's not necessarily REDS because there are other conditions. And I have a book about polycystic ovary syndrome, which I have as well, PCOS, which affects 1 in 10 women. And PCOS can also be an issue. So it's all quite complex. But when you know your menstrual cycle and you know the pattern that's there, if you notice any sudden changes, it's really important to seek medical advice. But amongst kind of runners, REDS does tend to be something that we see. And there are lots of things that might happen before you lose your periods. It can be things like mood changes, fixation on food, lack of motivation to train, kind of just a general sense of malaise. And sometimes there's actually a short-term boost in performance and energy when it comes to REDS. So athletes might see that, oh, they've got some short-term energy, but in the long term, it's very negative. And we know that runners who are fueling appropriately will see kind of better performance. So it's really important. This is a serious condition, and things like blood tests and DEXA scans really need to be used alongside proper medical treatment. It's a diagnosis of exclusion. So you've got to rule out things like PCOS and pregnancy and all these other things, really. But low energy availability is not a joke, and it can really affect bone health in particular, leading to things like osteopenia and osteoporosis. And it's particularly common in dancers, runners, people who have eating disorders, although not everyone with REDS will have disordered eating or eating disorders. It could be, there's also a slight genetic predisposition as well. And the idea that there's this idea that kind of within running, sometimes lighter is faster is not always accurate. And it's certainly not necessarily healthy, because we want to be really looking after our hormonal health. It's something we can just put on the back burner.
So quite often I will say myself, I'm just feeling really shattered. I'm just really exhausted. And there might be a slump in the middle of the day. And I'm not saying that's me overtraining by any stretch, but a lot of women will have experienced that, won't they? That kind of, that general slump. Is that something that you'd ordinarily expect for women? Maybe it's linked to a menstrual cycle, or it's linked to perimenopause, or whatever it is. Or would you say to somebody, actually, do you know what, you maybe shouldn't be having a slump? Maybe you need to look a little bit at what you're eating, or let's look around what else that might be?
Yeah, it really depends on the individual. So obviously our mood and energy levels will naturally fluctuate. And that's why I always look at the person, you look at their energy intake, their training schedule. And that's why you've got specific dietitians and things who specialize in REDS. And when it comes to a general kind of afternoon slump, probably the biggest reason is it can be due to lifestyle reasons. So maybe having a sedentary job, like right now I'm sitting down, I've been sitting down all day, kind of doing consults and things remotely. But it could also be maybe having a lunch that isn't particularly balanced, maybe just having a sandwich without much plant protein or fiber or complex carbs in there. So really looking at, are you balancing your plate? Have you been overtraining? Where are you in your menstrual cycle? There's so many questions to ask, but there's no one size fits all with that. But certainly just kind of tuning into your body and what it needs is so important. And that energy intake has to really match the energy output. Otherwise, we'll either kind of lose or gain weight. And certainly that's not what we want. We want to see ourselves kind of being nourished, feeling happy, thriving, and not under fueling. But if you are under eating, you will notice that your energy levels drop and that you just don't have that kind of zest for life. So it is key to kind of pay attention to that.
Are there, in your book, I know you said about not kind of alienating any foods, all foods good. It depends on what your output is and how you're feeling that day, whatever. Are there any hero foods, Rohini, for people who are maybe doing a little bit more in terms of activity. So, if you maybe lift weights, or if you are a distance runner, or even if you're a sprinter, are there foods that, you would really say, hey, this is really good for people who use a lot of energy because it might give you, extra calories, more protein? What are your kind of hero foods?
Totally. So I do think there are foods that we want to minimize, and those are ultra processed foods that kind of currently consist of 60% of the UK diet. Things like processed meat, which is a class 1 carcinogen, and I choose not to eat that because I identify as vegan, so I don't eat it for ethical reasons or health or environmental reasons either. But I certainly don't like the labels, and I think that's why I try to empower people with what they can add in. And I think that there are all foods could fit, but there's certainly some foods that have been demonized, like carbohydrates, which are actually just so important particularly for hormonal health. But they're key for kind of fueling our activity. They're our brain's primary source of fuel. So it's really important to have enough, especially if you're doing cardiovascular exercise like running. But some sort of hero foods, and there are so many different plant foods that I think are just fantastic, really. But foods that kind of are really, really wonderful are cruciferous veggies like broccoli, which are so rich in a number of nutrients and help to decrease inflammation, and things like walnuts, which are rich in omega-3 fats, foods that are rich in complex carbohydrates like quinoa and buckwheat, any dark leafy greens, certainly. And there's all of these foods, and soya is another one that's so beneficial. It's beneficial for fertility, and I talk about this in the book, for PCOS being shown to help improve ovulation rates. In the menopause, it can decrease hot flashes and brain fog. And we know it can reduce lifetime risk of prostate and breast cancer, which are so prevalent. And so it's just about understanding that all of these wonderful whole plant foods have so many fantastic benefits that they all have a place. And it's about getting that diversity in, really trying to rotate things and try different things out. But hopefully that kind of gives you an idea. I think probably my favorite one and my go-to that I have every single morning is some kind of porridge. And I might make it with buckwheat or steel-cut oats, sometimes called pinhead oats in the UK, or, different grains. But that just really fuels me. And I absolutely love the amount of fiber, the protein, the iron, all of that that's included in those. So don't demonize carbohydrates. They are really key. And remember that exercise can suppress your appetite. And we have a whole article on this on my website that was written by my marketing manager, Lily, and who's an athlete herself. And she's just about to do the London Marathon, about how kind of it's so important to fuel properly and support your active lifestyle and not kind of slip into the trap of underfueling, because we do know that sometimes you just don't feel like eating that much before or after a workout. We know that fasted workouts are particularly detrimental to women. And that's something that I really try and get my clients to shift away from, just getting something in them before a run, whether it's a crumpet with some jam or, a slice of toast with some peanut butter, or even a banana and a handful of nuts. All of those things are really important, rather than training on an empty stomach. And just don't recommend it for the most part.
Because the whole fasted thing was really big at one point, wasn't it? A fair few years ago, everyone was doing the fasting diet. Is there a place for fasting, or do you just generally recommend against that?
Well, fasting's being used in cultures throughout the world, and some people really get on well with it. It can be a form of calorie restriction. It can also sometimes help people with kind of mental focus. And rather than fasting, what I like to focus on, I talk about this in my book, is time-restricted eating. So that is eating in line with your circadian rhythms. Your circadian rhythms are really controlled by your exposure to light, and our body has its own internal clock. And that's why kind of getting out for 10 minutes in the morning for some sunshine or just some exposure to light, you need slightly longer in the winter, so sort of 20 minutes outside. But you could be eating your breakfast in the garden or going for a little walk. But that really helps with your sleep-wake cycles, your metabolism. And I really encourage people to try and do that first thing in the morning. And what it means is that you're eating when you're most insulin sensitive. So you eat your larger meals earlier in the day when we wake up, we've had a good rest. And actually that's when we're most primed to digest carbohydrate-rich foods. So that's why I suggest a big breakfast, a good sized lunch, and a lighter dinner. And that really can help people optimize their hormonal health rather than what a lot of people do, which is sort of skip breakfast, have a salad for lunch, get home at about 7 p.m. and eat everything in the cupboard, which is a natural response to underfueling throughout the day. And it's actually a recipe for ending up binge eating and eating in a way that doesn't really lead to mindfulness and feeling nourished. So much better is to kind of really have that consistency, and it's really important to do that. And, some people go, I really like to have a big dinner, and that's absolutely fine, but try and shift it slightly earlier in the evening so you're not eating a massive meal at sort of 9:30 p.m. and then going to bed an hour later. And that we know can really affect sleep quality as well. So a natural kind of pause from food for about 12 hours from the late evening to when you wake up the next day tends to be what the studies have shown have been pretty good for you. And longer fasts can be definitely attempted. We don't recommend anyone fast for more than a couple of days without medical supervision. But I think it's not a one size fits all. I certainly wouldn't recommend anyone who's suffered with REDS to be fasting. And I don't fast personally myself. I try and eat intuitively. I don't enjoy the feeling of those sorts of rules. And I do tend to kind of eat dinner a few hours before I go to bed. And I just find that really helps my digestion and my mood.
I'm with you 100%. The thought, as I said to you earlier, of not eating is just not on my radar. It's funny because actually what you're saying and how it is being interpreted by me is that we've got this thing in our head, haven't we, that eating less is better for, losing weight, it's better for you. But actually it's not. It's about eating the right things, and it's not about restriction, is it? It's about enjoying food.
Completely. And I think there's such an amazing array of cuisines and recipes and just joy that you can find in plant-based foods, the colour, the textures, getting in the kitchen, experimenting and showing your family and friends just how delicious it all is. But certainly kind of looking at what you could add into your diet. If you always choose peppers, try courgette. If you always go for apples, go for pears. Pick up cans of mixed beans, which have a diversity of different beans in there, or mixed grains. It's getting that diversity and that variety in there. And that's obviously not something that in the UK, unfortunately, we discussed this, that the food isn't always accessible and available to everyone, the healthy foods, but it's also looking at things like frozen foods. I always say to my clients, don't demonize frozen foods, because frozen blueberries, for example, are actually richer in anthocyanins, which are those fantastic healthy antioxidants, and that they give blueberries their sort of blue pigment. They're actually higher in frozen blueberries rather than fresh, because frozen blueberries are packed at the point of prime and rather than coming all the way from Colombia or wherever they come from. So it's really good to have some frozen fruit and veg, canned foods in there, and not kind of demonize those things. Not everyone can afford organic, seasonal fruit and veg, although certainly we want to be conscious of that and making sure that we are eating foods that are seasonal where we can. It's always good, but it's just about getting that variety in without kind of looking at perfection as being the goal. It's just little bits every day that you can add in.
And plant-based foods, as a general rule, are great for recovery, aren't they, Rohini? And also to reduce inflammation. So, do you see with some of your clients, are you seeing like big improvements in terms of their recovery rates when they switch their diets?
Oh, absolutely. And we know that because, some of the world's most kind of prolific runners and endurance athletes eat a plant-based or plant-predominant diet, because we know that these dietary patterns help decrease oxidative stress and inflammation. They help improve glycogen storage. They help improve recovery. And that means that they can fit in more training days and they can get less kind of an impact on their joints. So absolutely. And they're rich in nitric oxide, which is so important. So getting dark leafy greens in is really key. So I totally agree that these dietary patterns are so good for reducing inflammation. We know that there are specific foods as well, like turmeric, for reducing the impact of things like osteoarthritis. Could be helpful. Things like ginger for managing nausea, and peppermint oil for IBS. That we know that herbs and spices and plant-based foods have such diverse range of benefits. That's something for athletes looking at long-term impact on kind of your joints and everything, it makes sense to eat an anti-inflammatory dietary pattern. It's not that one meal or one food that's going to make or break your health. It's that overall dietary pattern that's key. So that's why we need to be careful as well of demonizing all those ultra processed foods as well, because people who are running really long distances, they will actually benefit from adding in some ultra processed foods occasionally. So it might be having a bar in, or, you know, some glucose chews when they're doing a marathon or whatever. So all of these things can have their place. And obviously for shorter runs, things like a medjool date or, you know, an homemade energy ball can be great as well. You don't have to eat those processed foods if you don't want to, but I think it's important to understand that they can actually be really important when you are training, and they can all fit. But the vast majority of your plate should certainly aim to get a lot of whole plant foods on your plate.
It's taken a fair while, hasn't it? But I feel like the tides are shifting now towards, you know, the recommendation of a predominantly plant-based diets for people. But it seems to me that it's taken a really long time for, you know, certainly the general population, but, you know, even experts like yourself to kind of understand the complex needs, particularly of female athletes. Why has it taken so long to kind of really understand what's going on in the woman's body? Have people just been a bit blinkered?
Totally. I mean, as I said, women were excluded from studies until the 1980s. So I think we've had this historic issue that, you know, we live in a patriarchal society. And then on top of that, you know, women of colour, Black women have been even more ignored, and their needs have been even more ignored. So I think that it's absolutely shocking. We can still see that when it comes to so many different areas. And I'm certainly not a psychologist or sociologist or historian when it comes to this, but there are so many different structural issues around this. And we still can see that when it comes to things like maternal health outcomes and the lack of funding and research in women's health, which is something I'm so passionate about when it comes to conditions like PCOS and endometriosis and things that can really affect people's quality of life and their mental and physical health. But certainly when it comes to, you know, women, we've got to advocate for ourselves. We've got to know our bodies and our cycle and try and, you know, get our voices heard. It's not always easy to do, but knowing your body and making sure that you're coming from a place of nourishing yourself makes such a big difference. Prioritizing your sleep, making sure that you're managing stress, maybe doing things like breath work or walking or running in nature, which has so many different benefits, and maintaining a community, having those social connections, whether it's a book club or your girlfriends, you know, that live around the corner, or your running group. It's so key to have that and to look after ourselves, because I think often women put themselves last, and they go into a caregiving role quite often when it comes to parents that are aging, or children, or even being the first to kind of put themselves forward to take kind of ownership of things at work. And it's just so important not to put ourselves last.
How can women then, I totally get this listening to your own body kind of philosophy. It's really important, is it? How can women improve their running? So for all the runners listening on here now,
yeah,
what is going to benefit them by understanding their own bodies better?
So I guess, when I say listen to your body, you know your body best, which is actually a quote from my mum, Dr. Rohini Bajekal, who's a gynecologist. It sounds quite nebulous. It's like, how do I get to know my own body? And that's why things like cycle tracking, even keeping a journal where you track your mood, listening to how you feel when you kind of eat certain foods, and just being more in tune. It can be things like yoga, which can strengthen the mind-body connection. If you can afford therapy, that can really help, you know, just really looking at those different areas. But certainly when it comes to runners and improving their performance, fueling appropriately, both before and after a run and throughout the day, and remembering it's not just about the time when you're running, but it's sometimes the day before, the day after. All of that can make a difference. Making sure that you're not cutting out carbs because you've been told that they're going to be, you know, a problem. We know that eating enough carbohydrates can help delay fatigue. It can help with endurance-based exercise, and particularly by doing kind of high-intensity exercise like running, and making sure that you're getting lots of antioxidants in, which is going to obviously help with your recovery. But all of those colourful fruits and veg, like filling your plate with the rainbow. And we know that that will all really help. Obviously, I'm not a personal trainer, or I'm not even a runner myself, actually, although I would love to start running more. I just want people to know that from a nutritional perspective, don't ignore nutrition. It can really support you with your running goals and your performance. And make it fun for yourself. Make sure that you're enjoying your food, you're fueling appropriately, but mix it up. Make sure that you're getting enough carbohydrates. Dark leafy greens are definitely your friend because they improve vascular function. So I personally eat rocket leaves every day. I have a big handful with balsamic vinegar when I'm making a pasta or I'm having a big salad, because they last in the fridge for a lot longer than lettuce, and bitter foods and vegetables are fantastic for hormonal health. And all of this improves your gut health as well, which we know that there's been a lot of discussion about the gut microbiome. But the key thing to remember is that fiber is only found in plant-based foods, and just getting all of these fiber-rich foods in is going to really, really help you. It's going to kind of help your performance, but also just help your daily functioning. It's not just about the running, but how do you feel outside of that? So definitely take the right supplements. And if you're low in iron or you have heavy menstrual bleeding, maybe you've got a condition like fibroids or endometriosis and that's affecting your cycle, seek medical advice. But make sure that when it comes to plant-based foods, you're combining vitamin C rich foods with iron rich foods. So that could be having red peppers along with a tofu in your stir fry, or having berries on your porridge because oats are a decent source of iron, and maybe taking an iron supplement if you are struggling under the care of your doctor. But lots of greens and beans and soya and nuts and things will really help you with that, and is really important. So those are sort of the key things. And if you are in REDS and you have been diagnosed with that, and you know that that's an issue for you and it's something that you can easily step into when you're running a lot, then making sure that you're really looking at your carbohydrate timing. You're making sure that you're getting enough fuel just before you go for a run and soon after. So timing it, not doing fasted workouts, making sure that you're building in rest days, and getting lots of calcium and vitamin D because that's important for bone health. So taking a vitamin D supplement. And when it comes to calcium, I see this big trend online where we get this sort of backlash against plant-based milks. And there's this new thing about oat milk as well. And it's really frustrating, Laura, for me as a nutritionist, because just because something is fortified doesn't make it unhealthy. It actually will help us meet our nutrient needs. So getting the tofu that is set with calcium carbonate rather than the tofu that has nigari in it, or getting calcium fortified soya milk, is going to help you meet your calcium needs. And I eat fortified foods, and I encourage people not to worry about the small amount of, food safe approved gum or whatever it has in it. It's just so much better for you than making your own at home, because you're going to be getting your nutrient needs that way. And if you have got REDS, you do need to pay attention to certain nutrients like calcium. So I hope that kind of emphasizes the point that it's not just about what's natural or what's whole or what's unprocessed, but looking at the whole picture of your energy needs, of meeting your nutrient needs, and not demonizing things just because they're not, from the earth, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. We mustn't be scared of fortified foods.
No, and supplements. I think it's, if when people say this is natural, this is unnatural, if we were doing what was natural, most of us would be dead at 35. We've extended our lifespan, and we need to extend our health span. And for me, evidence-based nutrition is about that, and it's about getting the right messages out there to people so that they don't get scared and that they don't skip their vitamin D supplements, their vitamin B12 supplements, and end up with issues. We know that, for example, when you're not supplementing with iodine, and in this country we have quite low levels of iodine, we don't iodize our salt, for example, we know that low iodine levels can really negatively affect fetal brain health. And they are not, it's really important to make sure that you're going into a pregnancy with adequate iodine intake, and a supplement, a potassium iodide supplement's the easiest way, or having a couple of sheets of nori. But I think there's still this misunderstanding around that. And this isn't something that just affects plant-based athletes, by the way. It absolutely drives me mad when people think that, because most people are not considering where their nutrients come from. They're not really paying attention to their diet. And actually, if you are vegan or vegetarian, you're much more likely to be thinking about your nutrition. You obviously don't want to hyperfixate on it, but you do want to be aware any healthy diet needs to be planned. So I can't emphasize that enough, because it's something that we see in non-plant-based eaters, or omnivores rather, will be lower in certain things that are rich in plant-based foods. So, for example, magnesium is found in abundance in dark leafy greens and things like that. And we know plant-based eaters have higher levels of folate and intake and things like that. That's found in things like mangoes and, again, greens and beans. So if we lived in a vegan world, we would have probably a lot more B12 fortified foods. But because we don't, we just need to be sensible and take supplements when we need to.
Yeah, it's just about, like you say, planning a little bit, isn't it? And knowing that you need a varied diet. Now, from a runner's perspective, Rohini, I know that when I go out for a run, my mood is boosted. But I also know that my mood is boosted from being a vegan and eating a lot of plant-based foods. And I've heard this, from countless other vegans. What is it about eating a plant-based diet that makes us so happy?
Oh, it's so many things. I think it's the wonderful colours, the micronutrients that we know are so important for brain health. And while I'll never say that, a plant-based diet is the panacea for mental health conditions, we know that colourful plant-rich diets can help with reducing symptoms of mild anxiety and depression. And we know that it can really help keep us satiated and happy and meet our energy needs. So it's a variety of things. And I think personally for me, it's eating in a way that aligns with my values. That's something that is so important. And Laura, I'm not sure if you feel the same, but I feel like when I put a plate of wonderful plant-based food in front of me, I just feel so much gratitude and happiness. And I think that when I've eaten animal foods in the past, I think I knew deep down, this is not right. This is not okay. This doesn't align with my values to be kind to the planet, to animals, to myself. So I just think that is one of the most powerful things. And beyond nutrition is so much more than the nutritional value of food. And that's why I'm so passionate about nutrition, because it is also about culture, connection, joy, values. Food is such an important way that we connect with ourselves and with others. It's that chance to really send ourselves that sign that we're nourishing ourselves. And that's why a plant-based diet is just absolutely fantastic. And it's, I think so many people agree with that.
I just think that's a lovely way to describe it. And you just use the word joy then. And for me, that encompasses what a plant-based diet is. It's joyful, it's wholesome, it's nourishing. It's all those things that you just said. And Rohini, I think all you need to do now is start running as well. And the full package, because everyone that's going to run and eat a plant-based diet is going to be super happy. That's my prediction.
Oh, I know. I think it's wonderful. I did do the Couch to 5K app, and now that it's spring and summer, I will definitely be out there. I'm definitely a warm weather person, and I do kind of a mixture of strength training. I do some kind of HIIT exercise, yoga. So I think running's the one thing I really want to add in. I do believe having a diversity of exercise can be just as helpful as having a diversity of plants on your plate, because I think our bodies need different things, different days, different seasons, and it's just about rotating that. And actually different practices can actually help strengthen your running. We know that those who actually strength train or have yoga, it can help you with the flexibility, with the recovery, with the strength and performance that's needed. So look at your training and also add in a diverse mix of things. But I certainly do want to. So maybe you can give me some tips on how to get started as well. And I'll check out more of the episodes of the podcast so I can get some inspiration.
I will happily do that for you. Absolutely, Rohini. The biggest takeaway you've given for me today is to, enjoy food and to listen to your body and to remember that it's okay to eat the cake, but it's okay to take a bit of a break from training as well. And there's so much more to food than meets the eye, really, isn't there?
There is. And we need to raise more awareness of conditions like PCOS, like REDS, like perimenopause and menopause, different times in a woman's life where they need different things. And it's just getting that awareness for runners as well, and for female athletes, that they could be in low energy availability and not realize it. And that might be the reason that they've got kind of repeated stress fractures, or their periods are missing, or they don't have the energy to train, or they're lacking motivation. And just being aware of that and spreading that information and the information on how people can nourish themselves is so powerful, because we don't want people to give up running. We don't want people to give up plant-based diets, but we want them to do it in a way that is actually sustainable, joyful, and can be continued now and in the future.
Well, people can get loads more information about what you do and how you can help people over on your website. And you've also co-authored the book Living PCOS Free as well, where people can get heaps of info. Rohini, has been a real education for me today. I really appreciate you giving your time up to talk to me, and hopefully our listeners will have learned lots about food and how they can better train. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's been so much fun, and I hope it's really helpful. If you enjoyed it, please do share this podcast and spread awareness.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening, and don't forget to leave a review for the Vegan Fitness Runner podcast. Please subscribe if you don't want to miss an episode, and remember you can find out more about all my guests and further information on all the topics covered over on the website veganfitnessrunner.com. Thanks again, and bye for now.